Well, this episode is more of a tutorial on how to make an adapter for your house if it's burned out or you lost it. Since the older houses, some of them aren't 4.5 volt, they're 6 or 9 volt. There's even some 12 volters out there. Then also, if you have an older accessory, they were 3 volt, not 4.5, like a lot of the newer accessories on Lemax. Department 56, most of them are 2.9, 2.8, 2.6, right in there. Also, they're a different size jack. And Mr. Christmas is usually the same size barrel jack as a Lemax, but it's usually AC. And so, I was going to go over some of the different things to help you if you lose an adapter or you have to replace it. So, if you have a 6 volt or a 9 volt unit and you lost the adapter, you can hit like the Goodwill. As an example, I buy AC adapters all the time that are in voltages that I may need to use for something, such as this one is a 9 volt DC, and it was for a hovercopter, and it's got a very small 3mm jack, while most Lemax and most other companies use the 5mm jack, so it's slightly larger. But on a lot of the 6 and 9 volt ones you get from Lemax, they either have this smaller jack or they may have basically a headphone jack where it's got the pin, especially the 3 volt accessories. It's getting harder and harder to find them, so what I usually do is, because I can't always find them, and if I can find a power supply that's got a very large amperage on it, like this one's pretty low at 400 milliamps. I try to find ones that are at least 1000 milliamps or 1 amp or higher. That way it guarantees if I split the power, it's not going to be a problem. But it's going to show you basically what to use. And then this piece right here, which is a Mr. Christmas, which is AC, does not have an adapter, so I don't have any way of turning it on technically. With a power adapter, I have power supplies to do it, to make it light up so I can see what's wrong with it, which then in the next video we'll probably tear this one apart. So if you have a 3 volt or a 6 volt or a 9 volt and you need to make adapters, there's many ways to do it. If it's DC, it's going to have a polarity on it. So on the old 3 volters, this front pin, front of the spacer, is usually hot, and this long shank here is usually negative. And then same thing with Department 56. Now, you can kind of see that there's a difference in diameter. Department 56 is usually a little over 2, I think it's 2.5 millimeter, and Lemax is 3.5 millimeter. And you have different styles. This style has a flexible end for a strain relief. This style does not. They both unscrew and allow you to solder. The longer pin is your negative, and the shorter pin is your positive. This one has a isolator, so in case your wires are too big or your solder's too big, you don't touch. This one doesn't, but you can see it's got a much longer pin with a crimp that you can crush this around, and then a shorter pin for your hot. And normally, on most all of them, the tip is hot and the shank is not, negative. And then your 4.5 volt ones that are the standard Lemax plug-in style are like that. This is usually negative and the center is positive. But if you have an oddball piece from a different company, maybe it has a different polarity. If it's AC, doesn't matter, because it's AC, it's alternating current. If it's DC, you do not want to wire it backwards. So look for a polarity symbol on the unit. This piece doesn't have one because it's AC, but Lemax does. A lot, especially the older ones, will be on the rubber mat on the bottom. The newer ones may be on the box. But these, with the light not getting on it, is your polarities. This is telling you on the top one that the outer casing, meaning, where did I put it? You get it. This piece is positive, and the inside pin is negative. This one's reversed. This is how most Macs and most of the animated houses are. The center is hot and the outer is not. And that's what this symbol means if you've never paid attention or had any idea. Most of them are circles. Some of them can be diamonds. And then that's not related to the switch, but it gives you an idea what to look for. Now, if you have a jack like this, generally how it works is these are mono jacks. This is negative, this is positive. If it was a stereo jack, there'd be another spacer, and it'd be positive, positive, negative. Some stereo jacks are positive, 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 negative. And there's even some that have 5 or 6 spacers. Usually the bottom one, the closest to the top of your hole, is negative. What this does on some of the specialty things out there is if they're not using it for headphones, which is the most common thing you think of, it's different voltages. Such on the Jemmys. Jemmys have 4 spaces. The bottom one's negative, and then each of the 3 steps is a different voltage. So they have purposes outside of just listening to music. I use them for everything except for music for the most part. So I'm going to give you some basic stuff. This is an AC 6 volt 1500 milliamp adapter, or 1.5 amps, which is plenty strong to power this. Now, this Department 56 piece is 6 volts AC. Says it right there. And there's no symbol, again, because it's AC. And it takes a barrel jack, not a stereo style jack. So, now, I don't have any of the pieces to make a barrel jack. So what you can do is, again, if you go to the thrift store, just buy a generic one of these, and you can cut the end off, and then you can make sure you cut it down so you have some whip to work with, as well as your other end is still good for a different adapter, as an example. So, and we need to turn this cut end into this plug end. So I can take this Max adapter, which I have hundreds of, and cut the end off. Or what I just planned on doing was, this comes from an ancient air compressor for a car. It's the right size, but it's got the wrong end on it. So I'm just going to cut it so I have enough whip to connect to this one, but I can still reattach something to this if I ever want to use this in a car again. Set that off to the side. I'll try and show you some basics of soldering too, as well as how to heat shrink and protect your wires. Now normally I wouldn't make this. I'm sorry, I'm trying to separate the wire. So I was using snips to separate the wire. Usually I wouldn't make this. I just use my Variac and well, just plug it into the Variac. That's what I bought it for. So I don't have to make AC adapters for Mr. Christmas. But since so many people throughout the year I see post online, or I've been asked, and I'm sure other people have been too, where to get or make these adapters, I figured, you know what, I'll just show you how I do it, and maybe that'll help you out. So, get some heat shrink that's going to fit over the individual wires. Cut it in half. Then I'm going to get some heat shrink that fits over both wires. And I'm going to cut this piece in half too. It doesn't have to be this long. You always got to remember to put the heat shrink on first. And you want to make sure that the heat shrink is far enough away from the solder joints that you do not melt the heat shrink or shrink it before you need to use it. Now, the white line is generally hot. The white line. Some don't have a white line. Some, like this one, have a dashed line. See it there? If you don't trust yourself and you don't remember, you can always use a voltmeter and verify. You can use, without it plugged in, ohms, and check for continuity from the center to the white, or you can plug it in and then use it on volts and then check what you're getting. So you need heat shrink, which you can get pretty much anywhere. I'll try and put a link below for some. Auto parts store, Amazon, etc. You can buy tons of it in little pieces or rolls of it, whatever suits your needs. I buy it in every fashion because I use lots of heat shrink throughout the year. You'll need a solder iron, whether it be a pen or a gun. Solder. You can use flux if you want. You can get flux in a pen. You can get flux in a paste. I've used all of above on here. This is a flux pen. And basically you would just coat the wire so that way it transfers a little better. So I'm going to flux one side and not the other just to see if we can see a difference. So I'm going to coat the side that has the female end for the piece. So my soldering iron's up to temperature. I use leaded solder. That's flux core. Unleaded solder is not always the greatest. So this is really thin. I have thicker stuff. You can buy it again at stores or Amazon, and I'll try and put a link below for anybody who wants to try and get solder. If you don't want to use helping hands, you can do it in your fingers, but helping hands come in handy. That's what these are. You've probably seen me use them a lot. Mine are old and ancient, probably from the 90s or late 80s, and well, they're falling apart, but I don't care. They still work. So, just to make life a little easier, so it's less jittery on the camera or my hands trying to hold it, I'm going to use the helping hands, and I'm going to try and zoom in a little so maybe you can see what's going on. So there's a few ways to solder. If you go online, you can watch different YouTube videos. You can mesh these together and whoops, I forgot I zoomed in. Focus. You can mesh these together, just push them into each other and twist them. You can twist them this way. Of course, it's not going to focus. See, will it focus down here? Yeah, there you go. So I just twisted them together. But you got to be careful that you don't have any sharp points sticking up, because sharp points will puncture the heat shrink. So put that down. I'm going to grab my solder right there. Grab my soldering pen right here. And first I'm going to do is wet the tip, like so. Then I put the soldering iron on the bottom and allow the solder to soak through the copper. Solder is attracted to the heat, so it'll follow it. And you can see as I hate how it zooms in, and will that help with the focus? Alright, I'm going to zoom it back out to try and show this better. Okay, I was wrong. That was the wrong way. So, you can see how shiny it is all the way around. Because it soaks through, it basically wicks it in. Flux does help that, but as you saw, I only flux one side. So I'm going to do the other side the same way. I'm going to put the wires together, slightly about halfway up each one of the, where I trimmed the wires. And I'm going to twist the wires around. And then I'm going to fold the ends over so that there are no protrusions sticking out. And let's try and zoom in again. I always do that with this camera. I always flip it the wrong direction. Yeah, it's a little bit better. So you can see how it's twisted. And that there's no sharp edges sticking out. So, solder pen. Re-wet the tip because it's been sitting over here cooking, and then solder on the top, pen on the bottom, and then hopefully it's in focus because I can't see as I'm doing this. And then the magic happens. I had to re-wet it again. I flicked a little bit of too much off. And here's the solder joint. Doesn't come apart on the tug test. So next is to slide down your heat shrink, which hopefully you don't have any solder balls, it'll protrude in the way. There's one. Oops, let me zoom back out for this. It's hard to, I can't see the camera while I'm doing all this. Out. So with one slid on, the other one still has to be slid down. So sometimes when you slide them down, they curl. So I usually just twist them, spin them in a circle until it gets past any parts that it gets caught on, because it's really tight. And then now both sides are there. You can use a lighter, or you can use a heat pen. But for a lighter, you make sure there's no wind, and you just go across them like so, and they're shrunk. Lighter does kind of discolor them, so if you're trying to keep them blue or yellow or red or green, because they come in multitude of colors, or clear. I have clear heat shrink too, so you can see that beautiful solder joint you just did. You probably don't want to use a lighter. You're probably going to want to use a heat source other than a lighter, such as a heat pen. Even a hot blow dryer can do it. So, but because this can be damaged because of it's rigid, solder doesn't flex very well. That's usually why I put an extra layer over the outside, like so, which gives you a little added protection to damage to your heat shrink or damage to the joint being flexed too much. So I have my heat pen over here on. I'm going to pull it off and let it get the temperature. I have it set for 140 degrees Celsius, and that should start melting this stuff. Nope, this is a higher temperature rating, so I'm going to turn it up. Some heat shrinks have a higher temperature rating. They'll tell you on the side of the shrink or on the package, so I'm going to turn it up to 260. It says 253 on it, but I'm going to go a little bit higher so it's a little bit faster. And you just go around it evenly until it's all shrunk down. Like that. Good to go. So, let's just do a quick little test here, because this will be the next repair video, is this guy. And it didn't come with an AC adapter. Also, on the heat pens, they slowly cool themselves off. That's why you hear it running. It's down to 145 degrees Celsius. Alright, so we're plugged in. Yeah. No lights. No sound. Some sound. And the motor sounds horrible. So, but now I have a power plug for this next repair video. And then if you're working with these, as an example, on a 3-volt Limax, let me grab a piece of scrap wire here, and I'm going to cut a section off. Normally, I would not recommend stripping them until you're ready to put it together. But in this case, so you don't catch it on the inside threads of this example, but I can just slide it on backwards because it's a scrap piece of wire. So I can just slide it through. So on this, which is a little bit harder, you see there's a very small hole and then the stud in the center. Stud in the center is hot. Now on this wire, the black wire is negative and the red wire is positive. So we're going to do similar. I'm going to straighten out those wires a little bit. I am going to flux them. This wire I use a lot for doing LEDs in cars as an example, and I have learned that if you flux it, it's a lot better because this stuff is not the highest grade. It comes from China, so I've had it where it snaps, the solder joints crack or the wire splits. So on a lot of wire I don't use flux if I know it's pure copper. This stuff is copper coated. It's actually aluminum wire on the inside. So you can go into hours and hours of different types of wiring because there's so many variables out there now, and you just have to use what you get from the supply chain stuff. So the black wire goes on this outer pin, and there's a hole which you could feed it through if you really wanted to, like that. I will feed it through from the other side so I don't touch the hot. So what I do is I bend it out, like so. I take the wire and I twist it so all the strands are nice and neat and I don't have a stray one just hanging out there causing me all sorts of hate and discontent. I feed it through, and then I'll fold it down and fold this up. So basically you're making like a miniature Z. Now, you can pre-tin these in advance to make it easier to solder. And I should have, but let's say you didn't. How is that going to affect your solder joint or your soldering ability? So I'm going to use the helping hands to keep it stable again. You can do this without the helping hands. It's just, again, for filming. It makes it more stable so you all can see exactly what I'm doing. And I'm going to try and zoom in where it's clear. And we'll center it, like so. And I'm gonna sit down for this one, so I'm not standing up, make it a little easier to keep my hands in frame. Okay. So, wet the tip. Now, this big piece of metal, which isn't really big in the grand scheme of things, but to the soldering iron it's huge, because it has to dissipate the heat. So, I'm going to put a little blob on there and let it cool for a second, and then reheat the blob with the soldering iron and push the wire down by lifting and pushing until it cools. You'll know because the shiny reflective surface will dull a hair when it cools off. You really want a shiny surface. Usually indicates a better solder joint. Be careful because this is connected to here, so this can get really hot. Right now it's a little warm, but it's not going to burn my fingers. And there, when you squeeze it, it doesn't touch the center pin. Now this center pin is a little bit harder because it's a pin. It doesn't have a hole or anything to connect to. So and back in frame. What I do is I do this one similar. I'm going to get this center pin toasty and then put some solder on it and get a nice little ball. And I am going to pre-tin this just to make it a little easier. You can see how fast it tinned. You couldn't. Damn it, it was off frame again. Basically, this stuff tins really fast. As soon as you apply, it just sucks it right in. But now this piece is really brittle, and if I were to fold it over sharply, it would actually snap the wire. So I'm going to lay this wire, and you can see it's probably a hair too long, but I'm going to lay it up against that ball I made of solder, which isn't a huge ball, it's just a bubble of solder. I guess that would be an easier thing to say. And I'm going to rotate this so I can use both hands. And then I'm going to apply heat from the soldering iron to join the, probably helps if I don't slip, I'm going to apply heat from the soldering iron to that ball and to the wire to where they bond together. Do the pull test. Doesn't come apart. Now this piece sticking out is annoying, so with these small little flush cut cutters, that extra long piece you can snip right off and clean it up. I have, and I don't know why, but I have seen people put glue in here, like hot glue, so they don't touch each other. Come back down so it's in focus. But I don't. I've never had a big issue with it. If you keep your solder and your wire frays to a minimum, meaning that you don't have big balls of solder and you don't have any stray wires, it's not that big of a deal. And you can just trim off the excess. Then slide the cap over. As you can see, it just slides right over. And then you just screw it on. I start backwards till it finds that thread. It goes click, and then tighten it up. I just tighten it with my fingers, like so. And you can unscrew it and fix it in the future if you have a problem, or you break a wire, or you need to change it, so on and so forth. The reason that the outer one is negative is this is a metal cap, not plastic or rubber like the other one, and it's actually touching the inside. So this whole thing is grounded, or to the negative side of your power. Now screw it on, pull test. You can see the bigger hole in the back, which is the advantage of the rubber one. The rubber style ones, you can see the hole is also large, but you can actually heat this up and shrink it in some cases. Some cases you can't. I haven't tried these. These are brand new. They just showed up yesterday. So I haven't tried them. But I bought them because these little guys that I buy that are metal that I use for my 3-volt accessories, they're getting more expensive. And I also wanted to try something different to see if these worked for other things, because they're larger, fatter, so you get a better grip on them for pulling. And I don't just use them for Limax, so that's another reason. When I build cars that have external speakers that are mono, I use these guys too. These are a little bit more automotive friendly than these. So, because of the strain relief and the constant bouncing where the car is bouncing, so your wire is doing this kind of a jagged, sharp edge. It's not, but to the wire it is over time. So there's a lot of different styles out there and different size jacks. But I'm hoping this helps with how to make adapters, whether they be mono jacks, stereo jacks, barrel jacks, for your different Limax, Mr. Christmas, Hawthorne Village accessories. And back out. So that way, if you have a 9-volt, 6-volt, 12-volt house and you can't find the correct power supply anymore from the manufacturer, as you can see, this was trying to work. That's why it's here, because it doesn't work. But I just got this. It's Jutai Electronic Co. I got this off the shelf at a Goodwill. It was probably for a cell phone, a portable phone charger, some cheap toy. Not a clue, but I knew I needed a 6-volt AC adapter for some things, so I bought a couple in different powers until I was satisfied with I have one that was big enough to handle all the powers, which 1.5 amps or 1500 milliamps is very strong, and this house here I believe only takes right around 400 or 500 milliamps, so this will be plenty good for this and other pieces I'll be working on. So it's a basic tutorial on how to make your own adapters with different components out there. I'll link some of these on Amazon for you so you can find them, whether they be the mono jacks like this, the smaller mono jacks for Department 56, these little guys, whether it be barrel jacks like this where you don't have to cut one off unless you want to. If you're not going to do a whole bunch, buying a 25 pack's not worth it, but you know, you can get the single packs, or most of them are 2 or 3 to a pack, or you can just go to a Goodwill or a thrift store and pick up your own and make your own. One of the joys of this hobby is creativity, whether it be making bases or fixing the electronics. Also, when I was talking about the higher amperage, higher powers, is I get the 3-volt ones that are usually 2 amp, and I usually have to buy those brand new because they're super hard to find. And I will solder this to a bunch of these, well, excuse me, a bunch of these to plug in multiple 3-volt accessories. Or you can get a distribution bank where this plugs into one end and there's a bank of screws that are positive and negative to have multiple fingers coming out. I don't have any more around here, but when, yeah, I used them all for my display. I was looking at my little drawer here. So there's many different ways to power your accessories, especially if you don't have an adapter or the correct adapter. So as you can see here, not the right adapter for this, as far as it's not a Mr. Christmas approved one, but it is a 6-volt adapter AC, and this house will not exceed the 1500 milliamp that this can put out. So I'm not concerned about this house being damaged by this, or this damaging this, because this needs more power than this can put out. So relatively basic tutorial on how to modify different electronics like I do, to test houses, to test different pieces that I build for my display, I built for other displays, or I even integrate into automobiles when I work on doing electronics in cars. So hopefully that'll help if you have an oddball AC adapter, whether it be AC to AC or AC to DC. Explain how to solder, find, heat shrink, and protect different components so you can make your display run the way you want it to. Basically back to the original, but without using the original OEM parts. Because a lot of places you call, like Lemax, they don't have parts. Mr. Christmas, they do. They have a Mr. Christmas guy in Florida. But I don't know if he has all the different AC adapters out there. But this is how you can make your own with different style ends, different style powers. Just make sure that you read, they're all labeled, whether they're a sticker or they're engraved in the plastic. Make sure you read the powers. Like this one's a Nikon. I use this one too for testing. It doesn't matter as long as I don't exceed the amperage, which this can handle a half an amp. So as long as whatever I'm plugging into it doesn't exceed a half an amp, I'm fine. If I exceed a half an amp, this gets hot and it will burn out. Same with this. If I plug something that's 2 amps, this will get hot and this will burn out. So, but yeah, so that's that one. So in the next video, we're going to be working on this Mr. Christmas carousel that is yeah, it doesn't have a make. It just says Mr. Christmas. The sticker's really worn off. Something holiday around the carousel is what I think it says. And it says a 6-volt 1.2 amps. So this is perfect at 1.5. So yeah, this is a high-powered unit. And this will be the next one I tear apart to see why it doesn't work. If you can tell by the huge amounts of dirt on it, it's from that outdoor display. And it quit functioning. So we're going to see if we can at least bring the rotation and lights back to life. The sound is not near as important because he doesn't run a lot of the sound since he has hundreds of these set up and they just overpower and make it deafening. So, but we're going to see what we can do to try and get this back to almost original and try and make this thing work like it's supposed to. So that way the end of this year could be back on its display for people to enjoy. So thanks for watching this one. Until the next one.